This day in history, February 3rd. Eileen Marie Collins, born November 19, 1956, is a retired NASA astronaut and United States Air Force, USAF, colonel. A former flight instructor and test pilot. Collins was the first woman to pilot the space shuttle and the first to command a space shuttle mission. A graduate of Corning Community College, where she earned an associate degree in mathematics in 1976, and Syracuse University, where she graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in mathematics and economics in 1978. Collins was commissioned as an officer in the USAF through Syracuse's Air Force Reserve Officer Training Corps program. She was one of 4 women chosen for undergraduate pilot training at Vance Air Force Base, Oklahoma. After earning her pilot wings, she stayed on at Vance for 3 years as a T-38 Talon instructor pilot before transitioning to the C-141 Starlifter at Travis Air Force Base, California. During the American invasion of Grenada in October 1983, her aircraft flew troops of the 82nd Airborne Division from Pope Air Force Base in North Carolina to Grenada and took 36 medical students back. From 1986 to 1989, she was an assistant professor in mathematics and a T-41 instructor pilot at the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado. She earned a Master of Science degree in Operations Research from Stanford University in 1986, and a Master of Arts degree in Space Systems Management from Webster University in 1989. That year, she became the second woman pilot to attend the USAF Test Pilot School, graduating with Class 89B. In 1990, Collins was selected to be a pilot astronaut with NASA Astronaut Group 13. She flew the Space Shuttle as the pilot of the 1995 STS-63 mission, which involved a space rendezvous between Space Shuttle Discovery and the Russian space station Mir. She was also the pilot for STS-84 in 1997. She became the first woman to command a U.S. spacecraft with STS-93, which launched in July 1999 and deployed the Chandra X-ray Observatory. This day in history, February 3rd. This day in history, February 3rd. Jacob Ludwig Felix Mendelson Bartholdy, born February 3rd, 1809, Hamburg, Germany. Died November 4th, 1847, aged 38, Leipzig, Germany. Widely known as Felix Mendelson, was a German composer, pianist, organist, and conductor of the early Romantic period. Mendelssohn's compositions include symphonies, concertos, piano music, and chamber music. His best-known works include the overture and incidental music for A Midsummer Night's Dream, which includes his Wedding March, the Italian Symphony, the Scottish Symphony, the Oratorio St. Paul, the Oratorio Elijah, the Overture The Hebrides, the Mature Violin Concerto, the String Octet, and the melody used in the Christmas Carol. Hark! The Herald Angels Sing. Mendelssohn's songs without words are his most famous solo piano compositions. Mendelssohn's grandfather was the renowned Jewish philosopher Moses Mendelssohn, but Felix was initially raised without religion until he was baptized at age 7 into the Reformed Christian Church. He was recognized early as a musical prodigy. This day in history, February 3rd. This day in history, February 3rd. Kulthum, born May 4th, 1904, Tame al-Zahira, Egypt, died February 3rd, 1975, Cairo. Kulthum was born in the village of Tame-e-Zahira, belonging to the city of Sembilan, Dakalia Governorate, in the Nile Delta, to a family with a religious background, as her father Ibrahim el-Sayyid el-Beltaji was an imam from the Egyptian countryside. Her mother was Fatma el-Maliji, a housewife. She learned how to sing by listening to her father teach her older brother, Khalid. From a young age, she showed exceptional singing talent. Through her father, she learned to recite the Quran, and she reportedly memorized the entire book. Her grandfather was also a well-known reader of the Quran, and she remembered how the villagers used to listen to him when he recited the Quran. When she was 12 years old, having noticed her strength in singing, her father asked her to join the family ensemble, upon which she joined as a supporting voice, at the beginning just repeating what the others sang. On stage, she wore a boy's cloak and Bedouin head covering to alleviate her father's anxiety about her reputation and public performance. At the age of 16, she was noticed by Mohammed Abio al-Allah, a modestly famous singer, who taught her the old classical Arabic repertoire. A few years later, she met the famous composer and nudist Zakaria Ahmad, who took her to Cairo. Although she made several visits to Cairo in the early 1920s, she waited until 1923 before permanently moving there. This day in history, February 3rd. This day in history, February 4th. The Yalta Conference, held 4th of February 1945, was the World War II meeting of the heads of government of the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union to discuss the post-war reorganization of Germany and Europe. During the Yalta Conference, the Western Allies had liberated all of France and Belgium and were fighting on the western border of Germany. In the east, Soviet forces were 65 kilometers, 40 miles, from Berlin, having already pushed back the Germans from Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria. There was no longer a question regarding German defeat. The issue was the new shape of post-war Europe. The initiative for calling a second Big Three conference had come from Roosevelt, who hoped for a meeting before the U.S. presidential elections in November 1944 but pressed for a meeting early in 1945 at a neutral location in the Mediterranean. Malta, Cyprus, Sicily, Athens, and Jerusalem were all suggested. Stalin, insisting that his doctors opposed any long trips, rejected those options. He proposed instead for them to meet at the Black Sea resort of Yalta in the Crimea. Stalin's fear of flying also was a contributing factor in the decision. This day in history, February 4th. This day in history, February 4th. Facebook is a social media and social networking service owned by American technology conglomerate Meta Platforms, launched on February 4, 2004, by Mark Zuckerberg with 4 other Harvard College students and roommates. Eduardo Saverin, Andrew McCullum, Dustin Moskovitz, and Chris Hughes. Its name derives from the Facebook directories often given to American university students. Membership was initially limited to Harvard students, gradually expanding to other North American universities. Since 2006, Facebook has allowed everyone to register from 13 years old or older, except in the case of a handful of nations, where the age limit is 14 years. As of December 2022, Facebook claimed 3 billion monthly active users. As of October 2023, Facebook ranked as the 3rd most visited website in the world. This day in history, February 4th. This day in history, February 4th. Charles Lindberg, born February 4, 1902, Detroit, Michigan, U.S., died August 26, 1974, Maui, Hawaii, was an American aviator and military officer. On May 20 to 21, 1927, he made the first non-stop flight from New York City to Paris, a distance of 3,600 miles, 5,800 kilometers, flying alone for 33.5 hours. His aircraft, the Spirit of St. Louis, was designed and built by the Ryan Airline Company specifically to compete for the Orteig Prize for the first flight between the two cities. Although not the first transatlantic flight, it was the first solo transatlantic flight and the longest at the time by nearly 2,000 miles, 3,200 kilometers. It became known as one of the most consequential flights in history and ushered in a new era of air transportation between parts of the globe. Lindberg was raised mostly in Little Falls, Minnesota, and Washington, D.C., the son of prominent U.S. Congressman Charles August Lindberg. He became a U.S. Army Air Service cadet in 1924, earning the rank of second lieutenant in 1925. Later that year, he was hired as a U.S. Air Mail pilot in the greater St. Louis area, where he started to prepare for his historic 1927 transatlantic flight. For his flight, President Calvin Coolidge presented Lindberg the Distinguished Flying Cross and Medal of Honor, the highest U.S. military award. This day in history, February 4th. This day in history, February 5th. The Third Punic War, the last of 3 between Rome and Carthage, came to an end this day in 146 BC, culminating in the final destruction of Carthage, the enslavement of its people, and Roman hegemony over the Mediterranean. The war was fought entirely within Carthaginian territory, in what is now northern Tunisia. When the Second Punic War ended in 201 BC, one of the terms of the peace treaty prohibited Carthage from waging war without Rome's permission. Later in 149 BC, a large Roman army landed at Utica in North Africa. The Carthaginians hoped to appease the Romans, but despite the Carthaginians surrendering all of their weapons, the Romans pressed on to besiege the city of Carthage. This day in history, February 5th. This day in history, February 5th. Pauncefote Treaty, 1900, of two agreements between Britain and the United States, the second of which freed the United States from a previous commitment to accept international control of the Panama Canal. After negotiations between U.S. Secretary of State John Milton Hay and British Ambassador Lord Pauncefote on the revision of the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty of 1850, by which the two nations would jointly control a projected Central American canal. The first Hay-Pauncefote Treaty was concluded on February 5, 1900. The U.S. Senate declined to ratify it because it still restricted U.S. rights over the proposed canal. The second treaty, November 18, 1901, ratified by both governments, definitely abrogated the agreement of 1850 and gave the United States a free hand. This day in history, February 5th. This day in history, February 5th. Cristiano Ronaldo, born February 5, 1985, in Funchal, Madeira, Portugal, Portuguese football, soccer, forward who was one of the greatest players of his generation. Early life and career. Ronaldo's father, José Dinis Aveiro, was the equipment manager for the local club Andorinha. The name Ronaldo was added to Cristiano's name in honor of his father's favorite movie actor, Ronald Reagan, who was U.S. president at the time of Cristiano's birth. At age 15, Ronaldo was diagnosed with a heart condition that necessitated surgery, but he was sidelined only briefly and made a full recovery. He first played for Clube Desportivo Nacional of Madeira and then transferred to Sporting Clube de Portugal, known as Sporting Lisbon, where he played for that club's various youth teams before making his debut on Sporting's first team in 2002. Club play. After a successful season with Sporting that brought the young player to the attention of Europe's biggest football clubs, Ronaldo signed with English powerhouse Manchester United in 2003. He was an instant sensation and soon came to be regarded as one of the best forwards in the game. His finest season with United came in 2007-08, when he scored 42 league and cup goals and earned the Golden Shoe Award as Europe's leading scorer, with 31 league goals. After helping United to a Champions League title in May 2008, Ronaldo captured Fédération Internationale de Football Association, FIFA, World Player of the Year honors for his stellar 2007-08 season. He also led United to an appearance in the 2009 Champions League final, which they lost to FC Barcelona. Soon thereafter, Ronaldo was sold to Spain's Real Madrid. This day in history, February 5th. This day in history, February 6th. Elizabeth II, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary, born April 21, 1926, in London, England, died September 8, 2022, at Balmoral Castle, Aberdeenshire, Scotland. Queen of the United Kingdom and other Commonwealth realms from February 6, 1952 until her death in 2022. She was Queen Regnant of 32 sovereign states over the course of her lifetime, and remained the monarch of 15 realms by the time of her death. Her reign of over 70 years is the longest of any British monarch, and the second longest verified reign of any monarch of a sovereign state in history. Elizabeth was born in Mayfair, London, during the reign of her paternal grandfather, King George V. She was the first child of the Duke and Duchess of York, later King George VI and Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother. Her father acceded to the throne in 1936 upon the abdication of his brother Edward VIII, making the 10-year-old Princess Elizabeth the heir presumptive. She was educated privately at home and began to undertake public duties during the Second World War, serving in the Auxiliary Territorial Service. In November 1947, she married Philip Mountbatten, a former Prince of Greece and Denmark, and their marriage lasted 73 years until his death in 2021. They had 4 children, Charles, Anne, Andrew, and Edward. When her father died in February 1952, Elizabeth, then 25 years old, became Queen of 7 independent Commonwealth countries: the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Pakistan, and Ceylon, known today as Sri Lanka, as well as head of the Commonwealth. Elizabeth reigned as a constitutional monarch through major political changes such as the Troubles in Northern Ireland, devolution in the United Kingdom, the decolonization of Africa, and the United Kingdom's accession to the European communities, as well as its subsequent withdrawal. The number of her realms varied over time as territories gained independence, and some realms became republics. As Queen, Elizabeth was served by more than 170 prime ministers across her realms. Her many historic visits and meetings included state visits to China in 1986, to Russia in 1994, and to the Republic of Ireland in 2011, and meetings with 5 popes and 14 U.S. presidents. Significant events included Elizabeth's coronation in 1953 and the celebrations of her silver, golden, diamond, and platinum jubilees in 1977, 2002, 2012, and 2022, respectively. Although she faced occasional Republican sentiment and media criticism of her family, particularly after the breakdowns of her children's marriages, her annus horribilis in 1992, and the death in 1997 of her former daughter-in-law Diana, support for the monarchy in the United Kingdom remained consistently high throughout her lifetime. This day in history, February 6th. This day in history, February 6th. Maori tribes of New Zealand signed the Treaty of Waitangi with Great Britain on the 6th of February 1840, a historic agreement purported to protect Maori rights that was the immediate basis of the British annexation of New Zealand. It was first signed on February 6, 1840 by Captain William Hobson as consul for the British Crown and by Maori chiefs, Rangataira, from the North Island of New Zealand. The treaty was written at a time when the New Zealand Company, acting on behalf of large numbers of settlers and would-be settlers, were establishing a colony in New Zealand, and when some Maori leaders had petitioned the British for protection against French ambitions. It was drafted with the intention of establishing a British governor of New Zealand, recognizing Maori ownership of their lands, forests, and other possessions, and giving Maori the rights of British subjects. It was intended by the British Crown to ensure that when Lieutenant Governor Hobson subsequently made the declaration of British sovereignty over New Zealand in May 1840, the Maori people would not feel that their rights had been ignored. This day in history, February 6th. This day in history, February 6th. Baseball player Babe Ruth, whose home run hitting helped make him one of the most celebrated athletes in American sports, was born. American professional baseball player whose career in Major League Baseball, MLB, spanned 22 seasons, from 1914 through 1935. Nicknamed the Bambino and the Sultan of Swat, he began his MLB career as a star left-handed pitcher for the Boston Red Sox, but achieved his greatest fame as a slugging outfielder for the New York Yankees. Ruth is regarded as one of the greatest sports heroes in American culture, and is considered by many to be the greatest baseball player of all time. In 1936, Ruth was elected into the Baseball Hall of Fame as one of its first 5 inaugural members. At age 7, Ruth was sent to St. Mary's Industrial School for Boys, a reformatory where he was mentored by Brother Matthias Boutlier of the Xaverian Brothers, the school's disciplinarian and a capable baseball player. In 1914, Ruth was signed to play minor league baseball for the Baltimore Orioles, but was soon sold to the Red Sox. By 1916, he had built a reputation as an outstanding pitcher who sometimes hit long home runs, a feat unusual for any player in the dead ball era. Although Ruth twice won 23 games in a season as a pitcher and was a member of 3 World Series championship teams with the Red Sox, he wanted to play every day and was allowed to convert to an outfielder. With regular playing time, he broke the MLB single-season home run record in 1919 with 29. After that season, Red Sox owner Harry Frazee sold Ruth to the Yankees amid controversy. This day in history, February 6th. This day in history, February 7th. Thomas More, born February 7, 1478, London, England, died July 6, 1535, London, canonized May 19, 1935, feast day June 22, English humanist and statesman, Chancellor of England, 1529–32. Venerated in the Catholic Church as St. Thomas More, was an English lawyer, judge, social philosopher, author, statesman, and noted Renaissance humanist. He also served Henry VIII as Lord High Chancellor of England from October 1529 to May 1532. He wrote Utopia, published in 1516, which describes the political system of an imaginary island state. More opposed the Protestant Reformation, directing polemics against the theology of Martin Luther, Huldrych Zwingli, and William Tyndale. More also opposed Henry VIII's separation from the Catholic Church, refusing to acknowledge Henry as supreme head of the Church of England, and the annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. After refusing to take the oath of supremacy, he was convicted of treason on what he claimed was false evidence, and executed. On his execution, he was reported to have said, "I die the King's good servant and God's first." Pope Pius XI canonized More in 1935 as a martyr. Pope John Paul II in 2000 declared him the patron saint of statesmen and politicians. This day in history, February 7th. This day in history, February 7th. Sinclair Lewis, born February 7th, 1885, Sauk Center, Minnesota, U.S., died January 10th, 1951, near Rome, Italy. American novelist, short story writer, and playwright. In 1930, he became the first author from the United States, and the first from the Americas, to receive the Nobel Prize in Literature, which was awarded for his vigorous and graphic art of description and his ability to create, with wit and humor, new types of characters. Lewis wrote 6 popular novels: Main Street, 1920, Babbitt, 1922, Aerosmith, 1925, Elmer Gantry, 1927, Dodsworth, 1929, and It Can Happen Here, 1935. His works were critical of American capitalism and materialism during the interwar period. Lewis is respected for his strong characterizations of modern working women. H.L. Mencken wrote of him, "There was ever a novelist among us with an authentic call to the trade. It is this red-haired tornado from the Minnesota wilds." This day in history, February 7th. This day in history, February 8th. Mary, born December 8th, 1542, Linlithgow Palace, West Lothian, Scotland, died February 8th, 1587, Fotheringhay Castle, Northamptonshire, England. Queen of Scotland, 1542–67, and Queen Consort of France, 1559–60. Her unwise marital and political actions provoked rebellion among the Scottish nobles, forcing her to flee to England, where she was eventually beheaded as a Roman Catholic threat to the English throne. Mary Stuart was the only child of King James V of Scotland and his French wife, Mary of Guise. During her childhood, Scotland was governed by regents. First by the heir to the throne, James Hamilton, Earl of Arran, and then by her mother, Mary of Guise. In 1548, she was betrothed to Francis, the Dauphin of France, and was sent to be brought up in France, where she would be safe from invading English forces during the rough wooing. Mary married Francis in 1558, becoming Queen Consort of France from his accession in 1559 until his death in December 1560. Widowed, Mary returned to Scotland in August 1561. The tense religious and political climate following the Scottish Reformation that Mary encountered on her return to Scotland was further agitated by prominent Scots such as John Knox, who openly questioned whether her subjects had a duty to obey her. The early years of her rule were marked by pragmatism, tolerance, and moderation. This day in history, February 8th. This day in history, February 8th. William Tecumseh Sherman, born February 8, 1820, Lancaster, Ohio, U.S., died February 14, 1891, New York, New York. American Civil War general and a major architect of modern warfare. He led Union forces in crushing campaigns through the South, marching through Georgia and the Carolinas, 1864–65. Named Tecumseh in honor of the renowned Shawnee chieftain. Sherman was one of 8 children of Judge Charles R. Sherman, who died when the boy was only 9. Sherman graduated in 1840 from the United States Military Academy at West Point. He interrupted his military career in 1853 to pursue private business ventures, without much success. In 1859, he became superintendent of the Louisiana State Seminary of Learning and Military Academy, now Louisiana State University, a position from which he resigned when Louisiana seceded from the Union. Sherman commanded a brigade of volunteers at the First Battle of Bull Run in 1861 before being transferred to the Western Theater. He was stationed in Kentucky, where his pessimism about the outlook of the war led to a breakdown that required him to be briefly put on leave. This day in history, February 8th. This day in history, February 9th. Treaty of Alinagar, February 9th, 1757, was a pact concluded in India by the British agent Robert Clive after his recovery of Calcutta on January 2nd, 1757, from the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dowlah. The treaty was the prelude to the British seizure of Bengal. The Nawab had seized the English fort at Calcutta, but facing the threat of Afghans in the rear and the military might of the English, he signed the treaty. Based on the terms of the accord, the Nawab would recognize all the provisions of Mughal Emperor Farrukhsiyar's Farman of 1717. Moreover, all British goods that passed through Bengal would be exempt from duties. In other tenets of the agreement, the British would not be hindered from fortifying Calcutta, as well as mint coins in Calcutta. The signing of the treaty was one of the events leading up to the famous Battle of Plassey. The Nawab was defeated and killed by Clive and his allies the same year. This day in history, February 9th. This day in history, February 9th. Yuri Andropov, born June 15th, June 2nd, Old Style, 1914, Negutska, Russia, died February 9th, 1984, Moscow, Russia, USSR, head of the Soviet Union's KGB, State Security Committee, from 1967 to 1982, and his country's leader as General Secretary of the Communist Party's Central Committee from November 1982 until his death 15 months later. Earlier in his career, Andropov served as the Soviet ambassador to Hungary from 1954 to 1957, during which time he was involved in the suppression of the 1956 Hungarian uprising. He was named chairman of the KGB on May 10, 1967. After Brezhnev suffered a stroke in 1975 that impaired his ability to govern, Andropov increasingly dictated Soviet policymaking alongside Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko, Defense Minister Andrei Grechko, and Grechko's successor, Marshal Dmitry Ustinov. Upon Brezhnev's death on November 10, 1982, Andropov succeeded him as General Secretary and, by extension, as the leader of the Soviet Union. During his short tenure, Andropov sought to eliminate corruption and inefficiency in the country by criminalizing truancy in the workplace and investigating long-time officials for violations of party discipline. This day in history, February 9th. This day in history, February 10th. Shirley Temple, born April 23, 1928, Santa Monica, California, U.S., died February 10, 2014, Woodside, California, American actress and public official who was an internationally popular child star of the 1930s. Best known for sentimental musicals. For much of the decade, she was one of Hollywood's greatest box office attractions. Temple began taking dance lessons at age 3 and was soon appearing in Baby Burlesques, a series of one-reel comedies in which children were cast in adult roles. In 1934, she gained recognition in her first major feature film, the musical Stand Up and Cheer. And later that year, she had her first starring role, in Little Miss Marker, a family comedy based on a short story by Damon Runyon. Her other credits from 1934 included Change of Heart, Now I'll Tell, which starred Spencer Tracy as a gambler, and Now and Forever, a romantic drama featuring Gary Cooper and Carole Lombard. However, it was arguably Bright Eyes, 1934, that propelled her to stardom. The musical was specifically made for Temple, who was cast as an orphan, which became a frequent role, and in it she sang one of her most popular songs, On the Good Ship Lollipop. Many claimed that Bright Eyes saved Fox Film Corporation from bankruptcy. By the end of 1934, Temple was one of Hollywood's top stars, and the following year she received a Special Academy Award for her outstanding contribution to screen entertainment in 1934. This Day in History, February 10th. This Day in History, February 10th. Galileo was placed into Earth orbit on October 18, 1989, by the Space Shuttle Atlantis. It then was boosted into a roundabout trajectory toward Jupiter, along which it benefited from a series of gravity assist, or slingshot, procedures during flybys of Venus, February 10, 1990, and Earth, December 8, 1990, and December 8, 1992. In addition to sensors to monitor the particles and fields of the solar wind throughout the interplanetary cruise and then within Jupiter's magnetosphere, Galileo was equipped with a skin platform that carried 4 optical instruments. A high-resolution camera was complemented by a near-infrared mapping spectrometer for studying the thermal, chemical, and structural nature of Jupiter's moons and the composition of the planet's atmosphere, an ultraviolet spectrometer for measuring gases and aerosols and detecting complex molecules, and an integrated photopolarimeter and radiometer for studying atmospheric composition and thermal energy distribution. Photographed by the Galileo spacecraft on August 28, 1993, from a distance of about 10,870 kilometers, 6,750 miles. Ida is about 56 kilometers, 35 miles, long and shows the irregular shape and impact craters characteristic of many asteroids. The Galileo image revealed that Ida is accompanied by a tiny companion about 1.5 kilometers, 1 mile, wide, the first proof that some asteroids have natural satellites. During 2 passes into the asteroid belt, Galileo flew past the asteroids Gaspra, October 29, 1991, and Ida, August 28, 1993, thereby providing the first close-up views of such bodies. In the process, it discovered a tiny satellite, Dactyl, orbiting Ida. Galileo also furnished a unique perspective of the collision of comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 with Jupiter as it closed on the planet in July 1994. This Day in History, February 10th.